There are so many elements that can be used with a mixed media card. Today we're going to play with using embossing powder on our mixed media piece. Hi, it's Colleen and welcome to the WOW YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss another video. I had this card panel that I had been slowly building up color and interest to it, and I want to add some embossing powder to this. So what I'm actually going to do is frame the edge of that card panel with my embossing powder. I'm using my WOW Ultra Slow Drying Embossing Pad, and I am going to add more of the stickiness into it using my refill and conditioner. This is a great thing to keep on hand to make sure your embossing pad is always sticky and ready to go. So now that it's finished, I'm going to show you a fun technique that I use. To me, it's another option from taking a ink pad and framing out the edges. I'm going to frame out the edges of this card panel using embossing powder. So I'm taking the embossing pad and just rubbing it over the edges of it. I'm not being careful. I don't want to be careful. I just want to add that element of texture and shine around the edge of my card panel. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Now I'm going to go in with Luxurious Chocolate Embossing Powder, which is a beautiful deep brown shade of embossing powder with touches of gold in it. I don't know if you can see that, but it's beautiful. And I'm going to add that around the edges. So now that I've added my WOW Ultra Slow Drying Embossing Pad, now I'm ready to add the powder because the powder will now stick to the areas where I added that sticky embossing. And you can already see how much more fun and detailed this card panel is. So I'm just taking some of the extra embossing powder off, and now I'm going to get ready to dry it with my heat tool. And just as a side note, I use copy paper to catch the excess embossing powder and put it back in the container so I don't waste anything. Now I'm using my dual speed heat tool from WOW to heat the embossing powder around the edges of the card panel. I like this heat tool because it works very quickly and you are less likely to warp your paper with your heat embossing. And I also use the cork board beneath it. I got that as a tip to use that because it really helps speed up the process of heating. So look how pretty that looks now that we've added embossing powder around the edge of that card panel. It's a nice change from using ink. So now I'm going to stamp some elements here from the Tangle Round stamp set by Notable Ink. And you can see here that I had inked up 3 card panels. All I did was did some ink smushing with some Distress Oxide inks. And I'm going to stamp these Tangle Rounds over the color. And then I'm going to add embossing powder over that. So now I'm using Midnight Embossing Powder, which has beautiful shades of black and silver. Stunning embossing powder. I love this embossing powder. And you can see how I'm taking 3 different sizes of these Tangle Rounds from that stamp set, and I'm using my Ultra Slow Dry Embossing Pad and stamping the item, and then I'm going over it with that Midnight Black embossing powder. Now, once I'm done with everything, I will heat set it with the heat tool, but I'm sort of doing an assembly line right now and doing all my stamping first. Now I'm going to do the same thing with a butterfly that I'm using from the Beautiful Butterflies 2 stamp set by Gina K Designs. I'm going to stamp this butterfly on white cardstock because I want the butterfly to stand out a bit from the elements behind it. So all you're going to see is white and then this beautiful gold embossing powder that I'm going to use, the Luxurious Chocolate. Now I'm ready to heat everything. And I want to show you the entire process of heating because when you heat set the embossing powder, it goes from a matte finish to a glossy finish and it gets really shiny, and all the little colors and textures in that embossing powder shines and pops when you dry it. I love the experience of doing this. I never get tired of heat embossing my elements. Look how pretty that is. And you can see how it's going from matte to shiny in this butterfly. All right, we have everything done. We have our Tangle Rounds all embossed and dried, and our butterfly, and now we're ready to put the card panel together. So I have embossing powder basically on the card base and on the tangle rounds and on the butterfly. And I love how they add an element of beauty and texture and shine to a mixed media piece. So think about how you can use your embossing powder to add to your mixed media piece. And there are many, many ways that you can do that. Here I did it using some abstract elements like the tangle rounds and the butterfly, but you can pull out your stencils, you can pull out a background stamp, you can use your embossing powders, even if you stamp some sentiments on the background just to add a little pizzazz to your background, the way I did with my card panel. Pull everything out and play with it with your embossing powders and see how you can take a mixed media piece and add embossing powder to add some interest and shine and texture. You won't go wrong with it, trust me. So my card is finished. I went back in and added 2 more butterflies, and then I added some black splatters over everything, and that finishes my card panel. I love the detail of framing the card base with the embossing powder and then bringing it all together with the embossed tangle rounds and butterflies. And then that black splatter just finishes it off. So here's my mixed media piece today using embossing powder. I'm really glad that you joined me, and I hope you pull out all your little goodies and play with how you can add embossing powder to your card panel. Everything I used today will be in the description box below, and I thank you for joining me today.